Hi, and welcome back to Football Made Simple. Happy New Year, everybody! And we kick off 2021 with a clash of ideologies in the Premier League, as the pragmatist Jose Mourinho hosted the ideologue in Marcelo Bielsa and his Leeds side. It promised to be an interesting contrast of styles, and in the end it was Spurs who came out on top, 3-0 thanks to goals by Kane, Son and Alderweireld. The XG showed that overall, Spurs created the better opportunities. The XG time map suggested that Leeds started strong, but once they went behind, they struggled to create despite their superior possession. But what tactics did both managers use? Let's take a look. A special shout out to everyone who's been able to support Football Made Simple on Patreon so far. If you want to help the channel, I'd love it if you considered supporting on patreon.com/footballmadesimple, and you'll get perks like early access to videos, exclusive content, and so much more. And this is how both teams shaped up on paper, with Jose sticking to a 4-2-3-1 and Bielsa the 4-1-4-1. We also have dedicated deep dives on each of these teams that I'll link down below and at the end of the video. Now, let's start with what Leeds did in possession. They had far more of the ball, ending with 64% compared to Spurs' 36%. Leeds were usually able to get out of the first phase relatively unchallenged, dropping both centre-backs into the box, and usually Spurs would only commit Kane outside the box ready to press. So being 3 versus 1 up, Leeds could look to play out. There were a few occasions, however, where Spurs did push slightly higher on the goal kick, and if Leeds played a sloppy pass, they could pounce, winning the ball back and pushing forwards. This is, in fact, how Spurs won their penalty. In open play, we see Son has moved to the centre-forward role and presses Meslier, and crucially, this time, despite having the 3 versus 1 advantage, Meslier goes for a more ambitious pass. It bisects the Leeds midfielders, and Winks wins it back, and his pass into Bergwijn leads to the foul. But for the most part, they moved through their own third relatively unchallenged, and in the defensive phase, we saw Mourinho adapt. In most matches this season, Spurs have moved to a 4-4-2 when defending, with either a wide man or Ndombele joining Kane. But if he had used this shape today, they would have been outnumbered in the midfield, and Leeds' midfield is their most important region, where Phillips looks to create, with Klich and Rodrigo looking to make forward runs. So instead, Mourinho maintained the 4-2-3-1 when defending, as crucially this allowed Ndombele to remain deeper, cutting off Phillips, whilst Winks and Højbjerg could remain man-to-man in deeper zones. And Ndombele nullified Phillips, and he couldn't exert his influence on Leeds, only having the 6th most passes for the team. As a result, Leeds couldn't attack through the centre much. Defending in the 4-2-3-1 had its downsides, however, with Kane being 2 versus 1 down when pressing. So eventually, he resolved instead to cut off the passing lane between the centre-backs to make changing the angle of attack more difficult. Leeds then looked to take advantage of this, with Ayling pushing with the ball into midfield to create a 4 versus 3. If unchallenged, he would have the space to look to play a more penetrative pass into the midfield duo of Klich and Rodrigo, who were constantly on the move. However, if Ndombele was drawn towards him to press, this finally freed up Phillips, who could then look to spread the play more. There was a vulnerability to this mechanism, however, as if there was a turnover, there was acres of space for Spurs to attack. And for Leeds, switches of play were a consistent pattern. In the first half in particular, we often saw Klich look to move higher into the right half space, and the speed of passing meant that the Spurs defense could be dragged across to compensate. Leeds would then look for the switch to the far side winger, either directly or through the midfield. Spurs' wingers, in Son and Bergwijn, could be caught on their heels at times, and both Dallas and Alioski were front foot, looking to get high quickly in the transition, and this overload could lead to crossing opportunities. However, Leeds often found themselves with just Bamford in the box, meaning that crossing was not the most effective way to attack. And in the transition, Spurs did look dangerous at times. For the most part, Kane would look to drop deeper to pick up the ball and create space for the wingers and Ndombele to attack. As Leeds played with a high line and their fullbacks were high, Kane could then look to thread the ball into them to get in behind. They got close often, but Leeds mostly got away with it. But what did Spurs look to do with their limited possession? When they had goal kicks, Leeds were much more aggressive in the press, with at least two forwards waiting to press the centre-backs who had dropped into the box. So we did often see Lloris look to go long in the first phase. Even when Spurs got the ball into feet early on, Leeds were as front foot as always in the press. They ended with a passes per defensive action of just 5.35 compared to Spurs' over 12. They would generally go man-to-man around the pitch, with Bamford mainly cutting the passing lane as well. When the ball went to a Spurs fullback, a Leeds winger could then look to apply pressure, and if the ball went back to the centre-back, he continued his run, now pressing the centre-back and using his cover shadow to block the return into the fullback. But high up, they had an interesting mechanism, particularly when Ndombele had the ball, and Leeds hadn't returned into a solid shape. Time and again we saw Bergwijn move narrow, dragging Alioski into a central region, while Son was moving central as well. This would then be the trigger for Kane to pull off of his man and into the wide region in the space created, with Struijk reluctant to move wide. Kane would then have the space to look to exploit. This is how their second goal comes about as well. Højbjerg plays the ball into Kane, and we see Bergwijn immediately move central, drawing in Alioski. Kane turns Struijk, and Alioski can't get touch tight as Bergwijn is free. This gives Kane the room to find Son for his 100th Spurs goal. Overall, Mourinho's willingness to adapt came out on top, although as always, Leeds did themselves no disservice. And with Spurs just 4 points off top spot, I'd love to know, how do you think the top 4 will end this season? If you made it this far and want to leave a comment, just leave a football emoji somewhere in your comment to make it easier for me to search and to reply to your comment. And I'd also love it if you commented down below what other videos you'd like to see more of this year, or even new types of videos entirely. And a big thanks to GetPsyched6 who recently joined my Ultra tier on Patreon. But that's all for today, and remember, keep it simple.